Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
It is so good to see you.
It is so good to see you too.
I figured since you dropped into the green room 2 minutes early, I could actually take those 2 minutes to say hello to you and connect with you instead of jumping right into our content. How have you
Yes,
been?
I've been good. I've been good.
Cool. I'm
Yes,
so glad you're here. You were the first person that came to mind when it came to care. I was like, well, I have to have Jeanette on.
all about the care, baby. It's all about the
Yeah.
care. We care about you, so that's why I'm here.
Perfect. See, we're exhibiting it in practice right now. This is how
Exactly.
it works. That's
Yes.
awesome. Where are you in the world right now? Are you in New York?
I'm up in the Catskill Mountains and it's snowing.
Ah, I love snow.
Yeah.
I thought about having a fire going behind me, like sort of fireside chats. I didn't know if
Yeah.
it would enhance the aesthetic or not.
Like- I know. I love that when there's a fireside chat and we have like the artificial fire going in the background just
I
to
thought
make sure.
about having my iPad right here to do it that way as well, because then I wouldn't have to keep feeding it logs or anything. It would just kind of Yuletide keep going.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's a difference between the fire chat and the fireside chat.
Yes, the fire chats are rapid fire, right? They're like really, yeah, they're like super fast.
Yeah,
All
one's a
right.
little bit more casual.
Well, let's get started. I want to talk about care with you. So before we get started on the questions that I have prepared and things I want to talk about, do you want me to introduce you? Do you want to introduce yourself? How do you want to do this? It's up to you.
Uh, well, why don't you start out with how we, know each other and how you know me, and I'll add a little bit of context.
Sweet. So we met, I don't remember exactly when we met. It was one of the events. We have like a speaking community, author community that we're both part of. And we ran across one another. And I think we might have sat and talked to each other for like 20 minutes in the midst of all of these people. Like you and I just sat down and just like straight up connected and talked for like 20 minutes. Had you on my show a couple times on Shareable, and like we just hit it off immediately, and I just dig your whole vibe on like how you're approaching your work, how you're approaching your life, what your values are. Like we just connected on that. So that's how I remember it, of how us connecting. What details did I miss?
Um, I think that is the point, right? Is that we connected. We
Hmm.
connected on something we both care about. And I think that's the whole point. Like that's how we connect with people is that we find something that we care about. And I remember how I got really excited because you're also into superheroes.
Super into superheroes. And actually you were critical in that journey for me when I left my last company and I was kind of trying to decide what I wanted to do in the next stage of my career. Went on that little sabbatical. I talked to a lot of people, and you were one of there's probably three people that come to mind that were major influences in me deciding to start the Superhero Institute and to really go all in on the superhero thing. And you were adamant about it. You were like, no, superheroes is like a thing for you. So let's talk about it. So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I love superheroes too. When I grew up in Denmark, I was an only child, and this idea that we have a superpower was like I was totally into that. And
Hmm.
as I've grown up, I've realized that our superpower is that we're human.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
It's
super
kind of a
human.
paradox, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that we're like not really acknowledging how amazing and amazing. Like, why is this focus not off? Come on, stop pinging me. There we go. Um, like this idea that being human is actually pretty amazing and awesome, and we forget that. We forget how amazing we are as human beings.
I
We
completely
think,
agree. And we see ourselves as units or cogs in the machine or units in the marketplace, when instead the thing that allows us to really connect are not they're not elements of what drives profit. It's what drives connection.
yeah,
And I so agree with you on that. So I want to go real deep into the idea of care here, because it's one of the three pillars of lovable leadership. When I outlined this book, it had been through like 5 or 6 outlines, and I started to notice some patterns emerging as I was writing it. And it started to come together that there were like three big themes that really make up lovable leadership. And one of those is care. And I break that down in the book in a number of different ways. But care has always been at the center of your work. And I was hoping you could start out just by talking a little bit about what does it mean to you when you talk about care?
hmm I think of it as three parts. Because I talk about how our relationship with self, our relationship with others, and our relationship with work is actually all part of our self-care. It's not either or. And if we can start integrating that and recognizing that care is what drives all those three relationships. And unfortunately, a lot of times we abandon our self-care because we care so much about other things. And it's that misunderstanding of what really truly drives us and motivates us and engages us is actually what we care about. And we need to be inclusive of ourselves. So when I talk about self-care, I talk about care, I talk about the impact of that self-relationship, that self-care, not about the habits of it, but the mindset of it. So we get a little stuck in self-care being about I'm supposed to do this versus the relationship that it is. And as you talked about before as well in the previous session about that self-awareness that comes with actually having that positive, curious relationship with ourselves. So I think about care from the perspective of self-care as having that constructive, curious, positive, compassionate relationship with self, so that we can connect better with others and ask more curious questions, ask better questions that allow to foster that human connection that we thrive on and that we need, which is actually part of the self-care paradox. We need others as part of that relationship with self, right? So we think of self-care as over there on our own, but it's actually really an interactive relationship with other people as well. And then that shows up in how we care at work, which comes back to that engagement, but also having agency. So how we care and work is about how we feel in the workplace. So self-care is about the self-awareness and that sort of self-communication, self-awareness, self-responsibility, and self-expression. So I base that on 4 questions we can ask ourselves to cultivate a positive relationship and help us find the road through the noise so that care comes from us. And then the way we engage with others is through, again, the care is spelled out as curiosity, acknowledgement, respect, and empathy. And that's where you and I overlap a lot, right? And that how do we cultivate better conversations based on them being care driven? And what does that mean? And then that shows up in a culture where people feel confident. They feel that they have agility and resilience and they're feeling empowered. They have agency over their day, which is also, by the way, how we also prevent burnout, but also work better in general. So that care that comes from the conversations, I think, is where you and I really sort of connected a lot. And we can go more into where that comes from for me as well, if you want.
Oh, we're gonna go so deep into all this because we got plenty of time for this, which is great. We got plenty of time to go into it. One thing I want to just point out is I appreciate how you've brought self-care into the conversation of care. In the book, I break out self-care as its own chapter because I actually think what you're proposing as self-care being a part of care in the conversation of care as a leader is even a little hard to swallow at times because we struggle with self-care on its own. So I kind of broke it out in its own category, but I believe everything you're saying here because I can't remember. I think it was Brene Brown who did research that basically showed that people who can't love themselves can't love others, right? So it's this idea that if you want to be a leader that cares about other people, you first have to care about yourself. You have to attend to your own thoughts and feelings. And something that Chris brought up in the last session was about getting introspective before venturing out and trying to lead and getting comfortable with like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where do you feel vulnerable? Where do you feel powerful? And all of those sorts of things. So I really appreciate the perspective that you're bringing of bringing self-care into care. So you were teed up for it. You were ready to go into it. Talk a little bit about where that comes from for you and why that is a way that you think about care for, as you know, in the context of leadership and teams. Where does the self-care thing come in for you?
Yeah. What I've often seen is that people function from a very sort of mental perspective. Now, I am saying it's about mindset, which can be confused with being more mental. But when I talk about mindset, it's more attitude, it's more perspective, right? It's not just about that mental, like, you know, I think we like to have strategies. We like to know what to do, but it becomes very mechanical.
Yes.
It becomes, okay, I'm just doing all these things, which is one of the reasons why most of the time self-care doesn't work, because people have adopted to these habits that they think they should have, rather than pausing for a moment and say, hey, what do I need right now so I can be present for us having this conversation right now? Might be different than what I need later on this afternoon for being present to a conversation this afternoon. Like, we need different things throughout the day, and we're not static people. And having that relationship with how we change all day long, and different things that we need so that we can show up fully. And what does that even mean? To me, that means we pay attention. We have the right intention so that we can pay attention, because intention fuels attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so if our relationship with self is that inner dialogue that's like, oh my God, I'm messing up here. I'm not good enough to be on your dialogue right now. If I had that internal conversation, I wouldn't show up authentic. I wouldn't show up about what I care about.
Mm-hmm.
I would show up trying to mimic what I think you care about, because I would be trying to please you, because I wouldn't be in a right relationship with myself. And so I think a lot of leaders are either completely blind to their own, I don't know, like not blind, but ignore and abandon. I'm trying to be mindful of not using the word blind when we actually are not blind, because I want to try to understand how people who are actually blind can find that offensive. But it's so part of our vocabulary. So I just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that they're being ignorant to how they show up, right? Because they've done leadership for so long. And then a lot of other leaders are too conscious about how they show up. And neither one of them cultivate a good and healthy relationship. And so one of the things I learned throughout my life of being a leader, and being a very young leader, was that I accepted the fact that there were things I didn't know. And I asked my team, what is it that you know that I still don't know? Because I'm new here, I'm leading you, it's a new team for me. What is it that you know about our customers that I need to learn, so that you and I can cultivate a good working relationship and reach our results together? Right? That was my question to people who had been doing the business for, I don't know, 20 years, and I was completely new as a leader. And I think that was the inspiration of my dad, who always said, we need to connect with people and understand where they're at, where they're at. But we also have to trust ourselves. Right? And that's where the care comes in, is that place of like really caring enough about ourselves to show up authentically, meaning we're not dismissing and ignoring all of what's going on the inside, but we're also not falling into the hole. So when I talk about self-care, I talk about really coming into that right relationship with ourselves, which is a big part of the mindfulness practice that I've done for 35 years. But I was pushed into it. I was pushed into it because I had some traumatic experiences and found myself confused about my place in the world. And so, and thankfully that happened early on in my career. And so I really had to sit down and say, who am I as a leader? Who am I as a human being? Where do I feel that I connect and create impact? And all of these questions, we can make them curious and constructive instead of beating ourselves up. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in this loop of beating ourselves up rather than actually being curious and constructive. And that's the care piece that really, I think, changes things, is that when we care about ourselves because we care about doing a good job and connecting with the people we lead, the way we ask questions change. And that changes the dynamic between people. Does that make sense?
It does. So what stuck out for me there is how crucial curiosity actually is here, because what I wanted to ask you about next, and the path I kind of wanted to take it down, was around, cultivating this mindset of care. And there's kind of a couple things that you brought up for me, which is about the importance of, one, self-care, in being able to be a leader who sees through the lens of care. How do we do that, right? And you've brought up the idea of, one, it requires a focus on self-care, of understanding ourselves and the voices in our head, and working on that, and working on our self-talk, and all the things that have to do with us and our own self-care. And then there's the relationship. You mentioned the three things: the relationship to ourselves, the relationship to others, and a relationship to the work. And actually in the book, I talk about, you have to care about the work. You have to care about your people. You have to care about your own purpose and what you're after, right? So, so you brought that up, and what I wanted to ask you is, how do you cultivate that? But what I'm getting from this is that it kind of really begins with, in all of these cases, a bit of curiosity. You have to be
Yeah.
interested in what's going on inside and be curious about that and be willing to go down that rabbit hole. And then with others, to your point of the example you gave, asking them questions, inviting them in, building connection, and showing care by being curious about what's going on for them, what's going on in their own mind of self-care, what's important to them and what they see. Do they feel validated? Do they feel seen? So
Yeah.
it is did we just figure it out? Is curiosity the key to unlocking the mindset of care?
Yes, I believe it is, and that's why I'm so so sort of focused on pausing.
Yeah.
Like that power pause that allows us to shift in that moment where we're rushing to solve a problem, rushing to fix something, and we're just doing what we've always done versus taking that pause for a moment and say, wait a minute, let's just figure out what's actually going on. What is the real challenge we're trying to solve here? What do you think is the way forward? And actually having a conversation that becomes more inclusive. That's a care-driven conversation as well. We talk about diversity and inclusion, and that means being able to have conversation that is inclusive of other people's viewpoint and perspectives, and actually listening to them, not just allowing people to pour it in,
Yeah.
but actually listening to it and asking more questions about it. Again, the intention that follows, that fuels the attention is, the intention is, I want to actually learn what I might not know. Even though I think I know everything, I want to learn what I might not know. And if a leader can have that conversation and say, what is it that you see differently that I don't? What is it that where we're not aligned? Because a lot of times people, they feel that they're not performing to the expectation of their leader. And a lot of times people don't know what they're measured on other than results. But we're actually measured along the way in how we think and how we approach something, right? Because the leader might think, you're not doing it the way I would do it. And then if the leader is caring about the person rather than just the result, they're going to have a conversation. They're going to have a conversation that, okay, how can we figure this out? What do you need so that you can work better? What do you need so that you can? What's standing in the way? That's a care-driven conversation. That's because the person, the leader, cares about the person, not just about the result. And so there's a lot of ways that care shows up naturally when we're curious.
I love the remark you made about the power pause, something that I'm working on in my own life, to constantly work more on power pausing. But I think one of the real benefits of that power pause is that, especially in a leadership role, I feel there's a real pressure to solve problems, to feel
Yes.
like you have the answers. And so often when we're in that mindset, we take ourselves out of the coaching mindset, of the development and the growth mindset as a leader, to ask the right questions. And that power pause does really give us the chance to stop for a second and reflect on, what is my role right now? Is it to solve the problem, or is it to help my team grow and solve the problem themselves? And that power pause gives you the opportunity to ask that question. And to your point, when you make curiosity a part of your mindset, when you get curious about yourself, you get curious about the team, and you want to exhibit care in all of those aspects, that curiosity will show up as, let me ask more questions rather than solve. So I really appreciate that, for lack of a better term, the tactical usage of a power pause to really
Right.
remind yourself that part of your role as a leader, one of the ways you're going to be able to exhibit care, is pause, get real curious, and then ask questions so that
Yeah.
other people can get involved, get engaged. And to your point, it's not just the tactic of asking the question and letting them talk. It's actually hearing what they're saying, letting
Yeah.
letting what they're saying actually land, hearing what's going on with them, whether it be, professional or something that's impacting their work professionally, which is actually what I want to ask you about next, which is, in the conversation of care, it could be very, it could almost, in the context of business, sound very cold, like care
Mm,
as a tactic, like we will use care to get the most out of our human resources. But
yeah.
I actually think that there's no real delineation between who we are at work and who we are at home. We are people. And especially now amidst the pandemic, like, I've got kids' toys behind me as I'm doing this full day event, right? Like, our lives are our lives. And what happens outside of work impacts people at work. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a leader that cares about the person, not just the employee?
Yeah. And I love that you're taking that sort of like the employee versus the person. I think I'm going to answer it this way. I think this is probably the best doorway in. I think a lot of companies right now are concerned about people leaving, people burning out, and so on and so forth. So they instill a lot of well-being programs, which are great. We need them. People need to have access to the resources, but that's to care for people, right? And so that's the employee, that we're shoving it over there. It's your own problem. Self-care is your thing. You figure it out. You use the program and you'll be fine. You'll be better, right?
Yep. It's a Tylenol for your headache rather than
Yeah.
addressing why you have headaches.
Yeah. And we know this from our mindset of fixing a disease, not by changing what's causing it, but by doing something for the symptoms of the disease. We take a pill, we do whatever, but we don't actually look at what's the root cause of the problem, right? So when I was in functional medicine and practiced health and well-being, I could constantly see that stress was the symptom, but the root cause was not feeling seen and heard and included at work.
Yeah.
That's what caused the stress, right? But then we could fix stress. But we're not going to fix stress if we don't change the relationship.
It keeps
And
coming
so
back.
it keeps coming back. It's going to keep coming back. We're not changing. We can't change our environment. We can change culture, but we can't change all the constant changes and challenges that we're going through right now. But we can navigate them differently. And a leader that looks at the human being and the person says, I understand that this is stressful for you. What do you need so that you can navigate this a little better? Like, how can I support you not feeling uncertain or doubtful? Like I talk about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt,
Yep.
right? And those three FUDs that are sort of always there, and especially right now. And if a leader ignores that and pretends that we don't all have fear, uncertainty, and doubt in us, but wants to just be like, what are you doing to fix the project versus how are you doing so that you can work on this project? They're missing the opportunity to actually strengthening the process of getting good work done.
Yeah.
Because if we ourselves are sitting around having fear, uncertainty, and doubt about, are we doing a good job, for example? Guess what? We're not going to do a good job.
Yeah.
Because we're not actually using the strength which we were hired for, which is our skills and our opinions and the way we see the world. Then we're ending up just executing something, hoping that it will satisfy our leader. But if there's a care about the person, then we're changing that dynamic and talking about how are we achieving the success and the results and the projects and that piece. And that's where I think a lot of leaders right now are burning out too, because they think they have to care for people. They have to fix what people are going through. And that's where you have somebody's back, is just to say, I care about you. Are you okay right now? What's going on? Do we need to talk about anything before we jump to the work conversation?
Yeah.
It's a small question, just somebody knowing. And to be honest, I have gotten, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. The amount of emails I have gotten from people saying, my mother just died, my dad just died, my friend just died. We can't ignore that this is happening a lot more these days than ever. Of course, it's always happened, right? It's always happened that we have these losses, but we have ignored it. And people feel that they have to come back and be normal within 2 weeks. It's like,
Yeah.
that's not right. But what we can do is say, I understand that you have to integrate this loss or whatever it is, the grief or the fear or the uncertainty, all of these things. I understand you have to integrate it. How can I best support you in doing that as we're doing this work together?
Yeah. I think there's a distinction in there that you made that's really important, because this is an area that I think is very difficult for leaders. And here's why I think it is that there's that invisible line between what's work and what's personal, right? There's that, it's not personal, it's just business. When in reality, everything that happens to you is personal to a certain extent. So, I think leaders really struggle to know the line, the boundary. And I think the
Yeah.
distinction you made in there is actually probably the most useful way of thinking about it, is that you have to care about people, not care for people. That means you don't actually have to call them on nights and weekends to check in with them. It
Right.
does mean that you should be available to support them as needed,
Yeah.
potentially nights and weekends. And I'm not saying people should, work beyond their 40 hours. I'm not advocating that. But to the degree of like the framing of it is that
Yeah.
you are there to support, you are invested and interested in making sure that you care about that person, but you're not necessarily taking accountability to fix their problem.
Nope.
You are there to provide support if it helps to fix their problem, but it
Yeah.
is not an invasive thing. And I think that that's the invisible line that so many leaders struggle with, is knowing like, well, is this crossing a line if I ask them if they're okay? No,
Right.
it crosses the line if you bring up specifically a thing and you make them talk about it and you invade and intrude upon their personal lives. But I think looking at them as a human being and caring about them and giving them the space that they need. And I think your example about the deaths in the family is such a good one. One of the examples I give in the book is I watched as a client company I'd been working with, their most valuable employee had to go out for a death in the family. And while this employee, their most valuable, like this is the person that like made the business run. While this person was out for a death of a very close family member, they're emailing this person and texting them to ask about projects that was on this person's plate. And they lost that person shortly thereafter. They dipped out because they were like, you don't actually care about me. I was going through the most difficult time of my life, and all you cared about was your project.
Yeah.
Figure it out. Like, give me the space. So I think
Yeah.
that's, I found that such a prime example of like a company that does not actually care about the person.
Yeah. Yeah. When my mother suddenly died, and you and I have had this conversation, so I know you're comfortable with it. When my mother suddenly died while I was at work, and I went, home to wait for my dad so I can tell him what had happened. I was in the middle of a business deal, and the person that was very, very high up in the organization in Europe called me, and I picked up the phone, and he said it's X, Y, and Z, and whatever, got into the work conversation. And I said to him, yes, I can so and so and so put this and that together. However, I will be gone for about a week or two because my mother just died. And he goes, your mother just died? When? I was like, a couple of hours ago. He goes, and you picked up the phone?
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about this at all. Nothing is urgent. And so his response
Good
was,
reaction.
amazing. He wasn't even saying just have somebody get back to me. He just said, we're not talking about this. This is not urgent. We were talking about a business deal that
Yeah.
was in process. And so his response was just, and he even said to me, and this is not a person I know very well. He said, if you need anything, you let me know. I didn't even know him beyond business. And I think that's the key. If you need anything, let me know. I'm here. And somebody can care about people just by saying, listen, if you want to talk about it, let me know. But we don't have to force people to talk about it.
Exactly.
We don't have to be the leader that says, oh, tell me, are you okay? We can just be the leader that says, wow, we can share what we've gone through ourselves and be like, making it an open and natural conversation that we have human challenges as part of the human experience, and we're not leaving that outside of work. And that's where the care comes in. But I do want to talk about another part of the care, and that is care for our customers. Because a lot of times that care, if we have care as a company about each other, it brings it all the way to the customers as well. And you talk about purpose earlier, like we have to do work that matters. That's also about what we care about. And
Yeah.
that's the alignment with a company that has a brand that we care about, or a company that treats their customers well. And I think there's an alignment that's happening where culture and customer care has to line up. Because if not, it's just all fake.
I agree. It all
So
has to be part of the same conversation about it.
yeah,
To your point, it's all part of, it all stems from the same core of care.
yeah, it does. Yeah.
So I want to, I only have a couple minutes left with you before our next guest comes on, but I wanted to ask you the question I'm going to ask every guest today. But when I say the words lovable leader, who from your past or present comes to mind?
For sure, my dad comes to mind. He was the one that inspired me to be curious. And he was the one that always told me that people will tell you what they need if you ask them.
A good one.
It's so simple,
Yeah.
right? And so if you as a leader care about somebody and ask them what they need, you will start a completely different conversation. And the kind of conversations that I always heard him have with leaders and executives and CEOs and the people he was always talking to, it was always about their personal lives and what they cared about. It was about what was important for them. And he cared about that. So he got to know the person before he proposed them to run a company with multi-million-dollar whatever. So it was the person he needed to know to see if that was a match. And that came from being curious and caring about people, but also caring about his client. So that was he's inspired me so much throughout the years. And he always said that we don't connect with people through conversations that are mentally driven. We do it through heart-driven conversations. And that brings me to another leader who's doing a lot of work in this arena is Claude Silber, who really always talks about the heart in leadership today. And she's doing a lot of great work in terms of moving that leadership conversation forward about heart-driven leadership. I talk about it as human intelligence, heart intelligence, human intelligence. So I talk about it where our emotional intelligence and our heart intelligence meet, and that becomes our human intelligence. So I love how to work those things in. But there are people that inspire throughout, like, there are so many. I could probably mention a lot, but those are people I personally have connection with.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. I always love talking to you, catching up, talking on a podcast, doing something like this. I always just appreciate the time that we get to spend together. And I always feel like I learned something from you, and it helps me to reset sometimes and remind myself that self-care is important. You always help bring that to the surface for me. So I always appreciate that from you. Thank you for coming on this event. Thank you for supporting my book launch. And everyone go and check out Jeanette. She's amazing. I think I put everything in the blog post where people can go and connect with you, but I will make sure that in follow-up posts, everything will be linked.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you. Good luck with the book. I think everybody should read it, even if they're not just a new manager.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, coming up next, my next guest is in the green room. I'm about to bring him in. And I got to tell you, I'm super, super excited for my entire lineup is amazing.